Spider-Man is one of the most popular superheroes in the world, and because of that, there have been several movies starring the Wallcrawler. And today, I'm going to be ranking them from worst to best. Now, I won't be including the 1972 Spider-Man movie from Japan because most people don't know it exists, and frankly, I haven't seen it. Also, I won't be ranking the Venom movie because I don't consider a movie without Spider-Man in it to be a Spider-Man movie. I'm sure you guys will disagree with my list in some way, and I'd love to see how you guys rank these movies, so put your ranking down below in the comments. Anyway, let's get into it. Coming in at number 8 in the spot of shame is Amazing Spider-Man 2. The sequel to the first Amazing Spider-Man starring Andrew Garfield was a hot mess. The story was all over the place, and I think most people agree it was because Sony was so focused on trying to create some Spider-Man extended universe of movies that the film just got bloated with cameos and tie-ins for other movies that never actually got made. The biggest letdown in the film is probably Jamie Foxx as Electro. The character is weird and awkward, and the VFX just never really looked right. The one bright spot in the movie for sure is Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy and finally getting to see her tragic story shown on film. It was a powerful moment in an otherwise disappointing adventure. Coming in at the number 7 spot, we have Spider-Man 3. The grand finale of the Rami trilogy is unfortunately nowhere near as good as the first 2 installments. From the retconning of the murder of Uncle Ben for seemingly no good reason, to bloated story structure which crams in 3 villains which causes all of them to feel shortchanged, awkward comedy in multiple parts of the movie, and one famously cringe-inducing dance sequence all make this feel like a parody of the first Spider-Man films, not a sequel. Even the actors in the film feel like they don't want to be here anymore. There are moments of brilliance sprinkled throughout the film. The Sandman birth sequence is still stunning to watch all these years later. Spider-Man's black suit still looks awesome, and the sewer fight is still one of my favorite fights from the Rami trilogy. The movie is a mixed bag for sure, but the overall enjoyment is just lacking with this one. Coming in at number 6 is The Amazing Spider-Man. The first Spider-Man film starring Andrew Garfield has one main problem, and that problem is Peter Parker. This film's version of Peter Parker was so desperate to be different than the Raimi version that he ended up becoming more of a loner skate punk as opposed to a nerdy genius turned hero. The tone of the character just felt wrong on every level. He seems arrogant and entitled, and that bleeds into his performance of Spider-Man. I have never found the character of Spider-Man to be this unlikable. The decision to make the Lizard the villain felt more like a delayed response to fans asking for this inclusion from the Raimi trilogy, and not like a natural decision made because it was the best choice for the film. Ultimately, the best part of this movie was the relationship between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy, and while the film isn't terrible, it struggled to justify its existence. With few likable characters and a fairly generic plot, the film just didn't bring enough to the table. Coming in at the number 5 spot, we have Spider-Man. The first Spider-Man film was an event for its time, revolutionizing what the expectations were for the hero genre in film and pushing things forward by leaps and bounds. The movie, while being amazing at its time, has not aged particularly well. Some of the obvious things to point out are the CGI looking less than fantastic. Some of the costumes were bad even when the film came out. Green Goblin, I'm looking at you. And Sam Raimi himself is famous for his horror comedy films The Evil Dead, which has a very distinct campy style. Some people find it very off-putting, other people love it. I'm kind of in the middle. It has charm at some moments, but at others it just feels goofy and out of place. But for all the rough spots this film has, it brings with it a lot of heart, iconic scenes, and great performances, which made a whole generation of comic fans call Tobey MaGuire Spider-Man. In the number 4 spot, we have Spider-Man: Far From Home. Now, this film is incredibly well made. It's funny, has great dramatic moments, the characters are all interesting, and the effects are top-notch. Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio was also fantastically portrayed, which is saying something because I thought Mysterio was an unfilmable character. The relationship with MJ evolves in a very cute and natural way, and the decision to bring Spider-Man out of New York and into Europe offered a ton of great visual opportunities we would never usually get with Spider-Man. So I think this film is amazing and maybe a contender for one of the best Spider-Man films, except for one thing. With Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man being so closely tied into the larger MCU, this film had to cope with the events that transpired after Avengers Endgame. While the expansion of the larger Marvel universe is incredibly exciting for a fan of the MCU like myself, it did feel like this film got bogged down dealing with the legacy of Tony Stark and Peter's role in that legacy. It ultimately felt to me like it was a story that was about Tony Stark featuring Peter Parker, which was just disappointing, and that is the reason this film fell out of the top 3. At number 3, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. Officially bringing Spider-Man into the MCU in Captain America Civil War was a huge moment, and everyone was unclear what to expect with this version of Spider-Man's first solo outing. What we got was a film that refused to go retell the origin story of Spider-Man and instead focused on the life of a Spider-Man that was still in high school and was a kid just trying to figure out his own life and balancing this whole having powers thing. Adding in some wonderful supporting characters and an awesome villain performance by Michael Keaton, the film takes risks with the portrayal of some characters and creates new fan favorite characters at the same time. What we end up with is a Spider-Man universe that feels fresh and new and full of characters we want to see more. The stakes of the story feel appropriately scaled for the young hero, and the balance of humor and action feels pitch perfect. This film is an absolute treat, and I can't imagine how they might have made Tom Holland's first Spider-Man film any more perfect. And at the number 2 spot, we have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This film is a breath of fresh air for the Spider-Man films because Peter Parker is not the main character. It's also the only animated film on this list, and being an animated film gave a lot of leeway in terms of the design of characters, the type of story that can be told, and the approach to editing, which gave us a very fast-paced and kinetic style. This flexibility is most evident in the different animation styles and effects, which helped push the comic book aesthetic of the film. This is one of the most visually striking animated movies of all time and easily takes the top spot in the looks department on this list. But looks aren't the only part of a great movie. The story is wonderful, featuring the origin story of Miles Morales and giving us a glimpse of several other Spider people from different universes, which opens up a whole new world of stories to explore for the Spider-Man films. I know a lot of people, myself included, are incredibly excited to see where the sequels to this film go. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Spider-Man 2. The second Spider-Man film by Sam Raimi, this film gets a perfect mix of all the elements a great Spider-Man story needs. We get a Peter Parker who is really struggling, money, his family, his friends, and dealing with finding balance in his life. He struggles like everybody struggles, and this makes him incredibly relatable because we see ourselves in Peter Parker. These everyday elements are what made Spider-Man so popular in the comics, and they're replicated perfectly in this film. Beyond just Spider-Man, the villain in the film, Dr. Octavius, is also very likable and incredibly sympathetic. We watch everything he cares about destroyed in one scene, and we see him turn into a monster. So while we want to see Spider-Man stop Doc Ock, we actually care for the man under the tentacles, which adds so much weight to every scene. Sam Raimi's signature campiness is toned down in this film, and it's rarely used, but when it is, it doesn't break the flow of the scenes. There's not a ton of action scenes in the film, but when they do show up, they're very well executed. I mean, the fight on the side of the bank building actually takes advantage of Spider-Man's abilities of wall crawling and web shooting, and it feels like a fight we could only ever see in a Spider-Man film. The train scene is iconic, and it's still great all these years later. For all these reasons and so many more, I say Spider-Man 2 is the greatest Spider-Man film made so far. There we go. That is my ranking of the Spider-Man films. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to be making a lot more videos like this one. And until next time, you guys have a good one.